happen.
Newscast follows in an hour. It's Thursday night on BBC One.
Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Grant Shapps, the government's Transport Secretary, appointed by Boris Johnson when he became leader, formerly co-chairman of the Conservative Party under David Cameron. Labour's Shadow Sport Minister, elected as an MP in 2010. She was a backbencher under Jeremy Corbyn, now a member of Keir Starmer's frontbench, Alison McGovern. David Linden, an apprentice who left school at 16, he became leader of the youth wing of the SNP before being elected to Westminster 3 years ago. Joining us down the line, Helen Stokes-Lampard, a practising GP, Professor of GP Education at Birmingham University and Chair of the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. And one of the country's most successful retailers, Chair of the online grocery brand Ocado, former boss of Marks & Spencer's, and co-chair of the official Remain campaign during the Brexit referendum, Conservative peer Stuart Rose. Good evening. Welcome to my guests here in the studio and to Helen, who is joining us down the line. Welcome, Helen. And we have a live audience with us in the way we've become accustomed to by now, via video link. Tonight, you are all in Carlisle or in the Carlisle area. So hello, good to see you. Very good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And of course, to you at home, you can join in the conversation as well in the way you know on social media at BBC Question Time. So let's hear what you have to say as well. OK, let's start with our first question tonight, which is from David Ewing.
Good evening, Fiona, and welcome to Carlisle. Has the time come for the UK to adopt the Australian policy of processing illegal asylum seekers outside of UK waters?
So there's been a bit of talk about this today. Plans, blue sky thinking, I'm not sure what, from the government. We'll come to you, Grant, in a moment on that. Alison.
I think we're a bit fed up of having policies that are pulled out of a hat by the Conservative Party. Almost, you know, some of these ideas that are being suggested that risk being really inhumane, that are being trailed almost to get people stirred up. I think we've had enough of that. And what we actually need is a decent policy where we treat people properly who have suffered, you know, in conflict, in the worst situations in the world.
And what is it particularly that you're objecting to in the ideas that have been mooted in terms of government, potentially government policy regarding asylum seekers?
David's question, I think, refers to some of the ideas that have been trailed in the media that then later kind of get abandoned about islands 4,000 miles away or offshore, you know, centres to receive people. And
I mean, Labour did suggest something similar under Blair, processing people in Tanzania, for example.
I think, you know, take, for example, what's happened with European refugees, for example, in Calais, where the Home Office could have more proactively sent officials, could have worked harder to get people who are pretty vulnerable dealt with in a proper way, and they consistently haven't done so. There are whole issues around the underfunding of Border Force that I worry risks our security, and that's happened over the past 10 years. But what really worries me about what we're hearing in the press all the time is you sort of almost suspect it's a bit of a distraction technique. You know, the government's having problems, so they come up with another one of these ideas to get people stirred up. And I don't think we should do that. I think they should put forward a proper set of policies. We'll scrutinise them based on their merits, and we should have an immigration policy that way.
And I should mention, Dave, of course, you referred to them as illegal immigration. I mean, if people are claiming asylum, they're not illegal yet. It depends on what decision is taken regarding their status. Stuart?
Well, listen, this is a very modern dilemma, but of course it isn't a modern dilemma. It's been around for hundreds of years. This country has always been the place that people want to come to. We've been accepting people here on a migratory basis for hundreds of years, whether it's the Huguenots or the people escaping from the Pale of Russia. And we've always been a home to these people. We've got a physical problem because they are coming over. We've got a legal problem because you can't just deport them. and you have got a moral problem, because we have a moral obligation, I think, in this world as a very civilised and very rich country to be able to help these people. On the physical side, that's not going to go away. So we have to think about how we mitigate the problems and how we do deter people from coming here, how we negotiate with our European colleagues about perhaps sharing the load and have better ways of stopping people making that perilous journey. On the legal front, when people are here, they have certain rights and we must uphold those rights. And then...
so what do you think about the idea? I mean, David's question is about processing these people not on UK soil.
Well, I don't know who it was in the House of Commons today, but I very much agree with what she said. This is the most bonkers idea that I've ever heard. I think the idea of actually bringing people in and shipping them off to St Helena, or putting them on used ships in used ferries in the North Sea or the Irish Sea is preposterous, and I think like that it's inhumane.
So
I don't think it would work. They've got to be fed, they've got to be clothed, they've got to be educated, they've got to be looked after. How are you going to do that?
So is it bonkers? Did you think it was bonkers when you read about this idea about Ascension Island?
First of all, the agreement stuff, and we've got a long and proud history as a country of people coming here and seeking refuge, including my family some generations ago, and I think that Britain should be proud of that. But we also have to accept that we have an issue with illegal gangs running criminal outfits, bringing people over across a very, very dangerous crossing in tiny boats, and that's the issue that needs to be dealt with.
But is sending people to Ascension Island a way of dealing with it?
So any responsible government would, of course, have a look at how other countries are dealing with these things and have dealt with them successfully, and look at a variety of different ideas. But I have to say at this stage, Alison sort of says, you know, I'm sick and tired of reading things in the newspaper. Well, you and I both, because, you know, you read all sorts of stuff in the newspaper and usually it's not government policy or anything of the sort.
No, it's your government briefing.
Well, let's just clarify for us. Grant, just clarify for us, because we've... No, but hang on. We've all read... and
think that somehow this is deliberate. So, no, actually, newspapers have to write stuff. They write stuff, and of course you then have to respond. But at this point in time, none of this is policy. When it is, of course, someone will come out.
But were these things, some of these things actually discussed then? So the idea of this sort of magic wave machine that would send the boats back by creating waves. I mean, that was actually discussed in a meeting?
Not to my knowledge, and I've not been
or sending
any
people to
Moldova?
Moldova?
No, look, I've not been
oil rigs
about those things at all.
But you must know. I'm sure you've been briefed before you came on tonight. Were those things discussed?
I can honestly say I've never been in a meeting about any of those things at all. But what is true, and what is quite proper, is we have to deal with the criminal gangs. It's a disgusting people trafficking exploitation that's going on that puts people's lives at risk. And actually, as that humane country that I described at first, of course we should look at if there are better ways we can help with the situation. And one of the things is not to turn a blind eye and enable these gangs to bring very, very vulnerable people to our shores, some of whose lives are being put at risk on the way.
So is the government serious? Because obviously this first of all was a subject of leak, and then it was confirmed that this was something the government was thinking about, how to deal with migrants coming over the channel. Is this something we're likely? Is this a serious proposition by the government? Offshoring asylum seekers and processing them off British soil?
Well, as I say, I can't comment on sort of speculation in newspapers, but I can absolutely
but
confirm...
so I'm asking if that is a government
Well, I can absolutely confirm that the government is quite rightly and properly looking at and thinking through all the possible different ways to prevent people from actually dying in the channel and these gangs from trafficking people. And if we weren't doing that, you'd be asking why on earth we weren't.
David.
Well, Fiona, this is absolutely astonishing. The Secretary of State for Transport, which last time I checked, includes boats, doesn't seem to know whether or not the government has a plan to put asylum seekers on boats. One of the things that I see in my job as the MP for Glasgow East is a very high asylum caseload. And I've got to say that the people who come to these islands to seek asylum are some of the most vulnerable people in the world, people who are fleeing war, sexual violence, famine, persecution because of their sexuality. And the way that the British government treats asylum seekers within the Home Office system is absolutely despicable at the best of times. And the fact that the UK government can't rule this out right now really does indicate that they do want to treat people like some sort of, cattle prodding or some sort of penal colony. And what I'd like the Secretary of State to rule out right now is this idea that they would use Scottish Islands as some way of processing asylum seekers. And I don't know if Grant can take that opportunity right now, because if he can't, that would be deeply alarming.
First of all, I want to take the opportunity to correct something you've just said, which is, of course, people come here fleeing terrible persecution. And Britain, as I said and has been commented on, has a proud reputation of bringing people in, and thousands of people making new lives here. But you just described it as if somebody in France is being persecuted, and actually, France is a freedom-loving country as well, where people are already within the EU. So I think it's just very important to be careful and cautious with our language here, and not try and present a situation which is inflammatory.
Well, I find it very difficult to take lectures about careful and cautious language from a government that has the hostile environment. And every single day in my constituency casework, I see some of the most vulnerable people in the world being messed about by the Home Office, left in substandard accommodation because the Home Office don't care. And this is just the latest in an example of really irresponsible policy from the British government, which has no care whatsoever for some of the most vulnerable people coming to this country.
Let me see what some of our audience think. David, you asked the question.
We all want to be a country that does give protection to those that need it. My father's side of the family was given refuge in this country from the Spanish Civil War. But the point is, these people are coming here illegally from a safe haven in France. We have...
They're not all coming illegally, Dave. I'm sorry to jump in. They're not all coming illegally, no.
If it's a legal application to join the UK, then to join the UK, that's fine. But don't forget, these people are going through Europe. They're going through Spain, Greece, Italy, France. Nobody's yet explained to me why the camps in France are still in position. I don't understand that. Why aren't those asylum applications being processed in France, or being processed in Greece, or being processed in Spain or Italy? I don't understand that, really. And it's been like this for quite some time. And whilst we're all fighting the COVID crisis, boats are still coming to the UK. And it can't be sustainable. It's unsustainable.
Dale.
From my point of view, the UK already has a plethora of impending prominent crises. It's got Scottish independence, coronavirus, Brexit. And I just believe that the demonisation of these desperate, vulnerable people is just a Tory distraction from the Conservative government's failure on all of those fronts.
Helen?
Thank you. I mean, as a frontline clinician, I see some of the most vulnerable people in our society, including people who are here as refugees. And the vast majority of them need our support and our compassion. And as a civilised human being, I feel deeply uncomfortable about the thinly veiled racism that is often wrapped up in these dialogues. So we're a civilised nation, as others have said. Let's behave in a civilised manner to the most vulnerable people around us.
OK, well, there's a number of questions been put tonight, so I'm going to move on. Before I do, I just want to tell you that we are looking for people to join our virtual audience. Sadly virtual, but it's what we have to do in these times. Just like the people we have here from Carlisle, next week we will be in Coventry, and the week after that we're going to be in Edinburgh. So if you live in either of those two cities or thereabouts, do get in touch. Go to the Question Time website. You can fill in the form there and think of a question or an issue that you're burning to ask, and let's see if we can get you on the programme. It'll be great to hear from you. Right, let's take our next question now, which is from Charlotte Tolman.
Hiya. So my question is, recently thousands of students have returned to or have just started university, but for students in Glasgow, the virus has spread so quickly that new students have been forced to isolate in their unfamiliar halls. We have been lied to about the quality of teaching, and I feel I've been coaxed back to university away from the safety of my home in Cumbria while still paying full price. There has been no regard for my mental health, and the only concern that I feel is me being part of a profit. And the money is a bad enough issue, but what action is the government taking to protect students' mental health?
Well, Charlotte's at Scottish University. David?
Yeah, I really feel for Charlotte. I mean, obviously, lots of students in my own constituency who've gone back to university, and I think that the first...
So what can you do to help her?
Well, the first thing that we're doing, for example, is to try and increase testing. So we've now put in a walk-in testing centre in Glasgow and in St Andrews as well, and it's about acknowledging that this is not the fault of young people. Going to university is an incredibly exciting thing for young people, and it's a very difficult time for them as well.
But they can't walk in if they're self-isolating. So
at the moment, there's a lot of guidance that's being worked up with the National Union of Students, which has certainly been welcomed. We've given quite a lot of guidance to the accommodation providers as well, but it's about understanding that for students, this is a very, very difficult time. We're doing absolutely everything we can to support them in conjunction with the NUS. And I really feel for Charlotte. Hopefully we'll try and get through this as best as we can, and we're looking to try and get in a situation where students can return at Christmas. But the situation in Glasgow is, there's no doubt, it's a perilous situation, and it's about protecting people's safety. Firstly, their physical safety, but also the mental health of students as well. It's a very, very vulnerable time for them, and my heart goes out to them, and we'll do our best to support them.
Helen?
Look, my student days were some of the most exciting and rewarding of my life. And I've, like everyone else feel for students who are in this situation. But the period of lockdown that's being proposed is short. It's a couple of weeks, and then a greater degree of normality will return. But of course, all of life is profoundly affected, and COVID isn't going to be passed in a matter of weeks. We're here for the long haul. We're into a second wave, and indeed a third and fourth wave will come, and we need to be prepared for that, and we cannot suspend education for all that time. I'm affiliated to the University of Birmingham, and I know the huge efforts that their lecturers have been putting in to prepare to do as much and a high quality online as possible, because nobody wants this situation.
But Helen, Charlotte's point is... Helen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Charlotte's point is critically about the mental health of students as much as anything.
Absolutely, and we need to ensure students are mentored, supported, they have great communication, and that basic necessities are provided for them. They can't be the victims in this. That's really not helpful, because it's not students' fault that they're in this situation. There's an awful lot of blame going on in some places as well, and I'm horrified to hear that. I've seen worse behaviour in older adults than I have in youngsters, by and large.
Alison, what would Labour do differently when it comes to, I'm going to say Charlotte's point, and I can see you've got your hand up, Charlotte, so I'm going to come back to you in a moment, when it comes to helping students, in particular in regard to their mental health, students who are isolating on their own in halls, many of them for the first time?
So there's two things for me. Firstly, the testing system and the tracing system, crucially tracing people who've got the virus so that they can isolate properly. Making that system work underpins getting a better scenario for almost every aspect of our life. And that goes for students as well, wherever they are. Because if we can have a proper system where people know that they can have a test and get the results back in a speedy way, that will help us across every aspect of our life. I've had constituents get a test and not get the results back for 5 to 7 days. That is not acceptable, and it's got to change. Obviously, the Office for Students and other bodies in higher education are listening to what students are saying, and I know that they want to encourage universities to be very responsive to the needs of students. And whilst we've all seen on social media the examples where that's not been the case, universities have got to be, I think, responsive to their students' needs, and the best ones. I'm sure there's lots of people in higher education who would absolutely agree with what I've said. One final point that Charlotte said that I felt was very important was about students and mental health. And we know that as a country, we've let young people down in terms of their mental health for too long. And, as a Labour Party, we've kind of scrutinised the government on this for years now. And I think that this crisis has shown that failure in sharp relief. So whilst, from opposition, it's early days for us at the moment, but I know that priority of having the principle of young people's mental health being something that has got to improve will be part of how we listen to what students are going through now and try to put policies in place that will help them.
And since you mentioned mental health, and I hope you don't mind me referring to this, but you've put your own mental health out in the public domain this week, and I wondered if you just wanted to share that with us.
Oh, well, I mean, as the Shadow Minister for Sport, I think that sport is incredible for mental health for a really important reason, which is that physical activity, we know, has a really positive impact on people's mental health. But when you're doing sport, you get the joy of being part of a team as well. And I'm sure Charlotte and lots of other students will be missing some of that at the moment. And I think once we are able to get back to more normal times, I certainly have found in my own, feelings of just sort of unhappiness, and particularly around body shape and body image, that actually being part of sports teams, and big shout out to the Westminster football team and the Wirral Valkyries football team, and the brilliant coaching. I just know how brilliant sport has been for my mental health. And
so that's something that's helped you in particular.
I've been really surprised this week about how, I wrote this article for Grazia magazine about it, and how many people have said, do you know what, I feel the same. I've never had much confidence about my body shape, and actually sport has helped me too. So it turns out I thought I was alone in this, and I wasn't. So it's been a good thing in that regard.
There's been a number of hands up from our audience here. Charlotte, you wanted to come back in.
I just wanted to go actually back to the first point in terms of people saying that we only have to isolate for 2 weeks and it's not that big a deal in terms of our education. But it's not just if we get coronavirus or are exposed to it. It's the fact that we can't join sports teams if someone gets COVID in training, or can't join some sports teams in general. Our whole life has gone online, and I can't mix within my household because I'm above the border, mix outside of my household because I'm above the border. This affects every aspect of university life. And I think to minimise it down to those 2 weeks is quite almost patronising to us. And there's been no clear guidance. And that's what we would quite like tonight from you guys, is when's the next step coming?
I'll just go around a little bit more of the audience, if I may first. Gemma.
Good evening, everybody. As a nurse in Cumbria and as a mum, I think the mental health of young people is of paramount importance at the moment. But all I keep seeing is our government talk about practical solutions and ploughing money into this, that and the other and isolating people further. But there actually doesn't seem to be any clear strategy in this day and age to support young people's mental health. I mean, young people, especially as Charlotte said at university, they're isolated from their family, their friends, they're in a new situation, but the government never appears to touch on mental health. And as we know, in the whole of the UK, mental health provisions for young people are very poor. And, you know, are we going to see an increase in a suicide rate amongst young people because of the COVID outbreak?
Catherine.
Hi there. I just wanted to agree really with what Charlotte said and actually pick up on a point where there is a degree of cynicism, I feel. I have two children in the northeast, one of whom is an 18-year-old fresher who's gone to university expecting a completely different life to the one he has here in Cumbria, and actually has found himself in halls of residence in an 8-bedded flat by himself because everybody else hasn't turned up yet, and they're not entirely sure when they will. So actually to minimise students' experience and say, well, it's only a couple of weeks, they'll be able to cope, they've got social networks. Well, actually, some of these children haven't at the moment, and they're away from home for the first time. And I am concerned that actually, even though he has a sibling in the same city, at the moment with their lockdown, they're not meant to spend time with each other because they're in separate households. So actually, this isn't just a temporary, it's young people, they'll be okay in a few weeks. I think actually we could see really long-term impacts on children who are going away for the first time, in different environments, in different cities where they don't know people. And we haven't really, from the university perspective, put in the kind of support that I would have expected as a parent, let alone as a mental health practitioner.
June, I think you take a rather different view.
No, what I was saying was that this could be the new normal, and we all, whether we're students or not, have to get our heads around this situation and learn to adapt, really. I'm not belittling it at all. I've got 3 children. Thankfully, they're the other side, you know, they're the later 20s. So they've been through this period. And I just think as long as you've got a decent computer, and I think that's something universities could ensure that, and don't assume everybody that goes to university has got a decent computer, that without a decent computer that you can jump on and off 24 hours a day as it suits you, you're sort of dead in the water. But as long as the tutors, you know, really work hard to get everything online and make sure everybody's on board that needs to be on board, I think this could work. I mean, it's such a sad time for young people as students.
Okay.
But you know, that's it really.
Thank you. No, thanks very much for your point, June. Stuart?
But Charlotte's original point was very important about the mental health of the nation. Absolutely right. But it's not just about the mental health of the nation. It's about the physical health of those people who are not COVID sufferers, who are not able to get into hospitals at the moment. Jeremy Hunt made the point yesterday that there are 10 million people waiting for appointments in hospitals and they're not able to go there. It's the health of our children in schools and universities who are not getting proper educations at the moment. It's the health, dare I say it, of business. And what I really worry about now is the cure that we're currently putting our country through actually worse than the disease? And do we not have to come to a time now where we actually think that this is now livelihoods versus lives? And I don't think we've had that debate properly. And I think that we're going to have to find, as we come into the autumn, we have a further lockdown or potentially more lockdowns. We come into the spring, we've got unemployment coming through. Dare I say it, we've got the hill, whether it's a good hill or a bad hill, about Brexit. The time in the spring, it could be very difficult. And if we just keep locking people up, and don't come to terms with the fact this illness is not going away.
So what do you think should happen in terms of the universities? You think that the students shouldn't be locked up?
I think that we should actually be more relaxed. We should learn to live with the virus. 40,000 people have died, but let's ask the question, and Helen is the expert. How many people, Helen, in the UK have died exclusively of COVID?
Well, Mayor, if I can reply. I mean, we know that we've said it's about 43,000 have died of COVID. We suspect there's another 10, 15,000 on top. That's the excess deaths. But people are dying all the time of lots of diseases. And we do know that there are implications of the lockdowns on other health behaviours. And we know there are people out there who haven't come forward with their cancers. And I do worry about the cancer gap. And there is something really serious to say that if you have worrying symptoms, you've got a lump, you've got a strange bleeding problem, please come forward. The NHS is open for you. It has been open and it continues to be open for you despite COVID. And I think there's some serious things that we do need to get better in terms of our messaging to the public.
And that's my point. The unintended consequence of what we're doing for this specific illness may have much bigger knock-on effects that we haven't even thought about, and we need to be thoughtful about it.
James.
Hi there. I kind of don't quite understand the student situation, because my daughter started reception class this year, which was great. But she brings home 27 households into my house every day. So, you know, the younger age group are meant to be asymptomatic or don't have the virus or can carry it but don't have symptoms. But I think the comment just made there is we do just need to learn to live with this virus now. All our children are at school, and every day my daughter brings home 27 households into my house. And there's no control over that. And if you think of all the children that are in school, in secondary schools, primary schools, you know, there's no control over this virus anymore. We just do not know who has it and who's bringing it into each other's households.
Gordon.
With the situation in the universities, are we simply just kicking the problem down the road, kicking the can down the road? I feel that we shouldn't lock down, especially age groups of people that tend not to suffer too badly with the disease. I know anybody suffering with it is terrible. But I simply think we're just kicking the can and kicking the problem further down the road.
So, Grant, let's just come back to part of Charlotte's question, which you haven't addressed yet. She says, we've been lied to about the quality of teaching. I feel I've been coaxed back to university, away from the safety of my home in Cumbria, paying full price with no regard for my mental health, only concern being profit. Has she got a point there, that the universities and the government have not been straight with students about what it was going to be like?
Well, I mean, first of all, I feel hugely for Charlotte. We can't expect young people just to put their lives completely on hold. We have to try to get the universities up and running again, education running again, and that's by and large working. But Charlotte's points have been big questions of debate in my household this week, because my eldest has just gone back to university last week. And he lives in a house of 4, and one of the others has tested positive. So they're all under self-isolation and going through that sort of, point in time where we come here, we've started to study, we're now having to do that through computer, but in a different city.
So in terms of Charlotte's question, though, when she says she's been coaxed back without any regard for her mental health, and we've had many students say, we weren't told it was going to be like this. We've got to have blended learning. We get some online learning, but we'd also get learning actually face-to-face, and many of them not getting that.
But I mean, it is because of the circumstances, and no one's got a sort of magic solution to this. We've got to be completely upfront and honest about it. Coronavirus is something that we're going to have to live with, and I hear what Stuart says and others, but the reality is that although it probably won't kill most younger people, they can certainly carry and spread it, and eventually it hurts older people. That's exactly what we're seeing in the figures now in hospital, in admissions, the 300-odd people who are on ventilators tonight, the 2,500 people who are in hospital with coronavirus. It will spread. So we do have to keep taking those measures. But, Charlotte and others pointed out, we can't just put lives on hold forever. And so we have to try to make this work as the new normal for the time being. And it does mean that there will be probably a combination of remote learning in situations. But there are lots of university cases, if you're training to be, physical things where you have to have a degree of with lecturer time, because it can be something that you're, in medicine, for example, where you have to be there. So, no, look, I don't think people were sort of coaxed back. Universities are autonomous organisations, but I think it would be wrong to ask or expect students not to return to study and not to try to get universities back. And I would challenge anyone who says that we shouldn't be trying.
No, to Charlotte's point was maybe the universities were not quite as straight, as open about what it might have been, what it was going to be like. Let me just put a question to David. Nicola Sturgeon, I was listening to Nicola Sturgeon yesterday, would not commit herself to students at Scottish universities going home for Christmas. So is there still a chance that students like Charlotte, she comes from Carlisle, but she's at a university in Scotland, may not be able to go home for Christmas? Is that still the case?
We are certainly very hopeful that students can get back for Christmas, and if we can make that happen, we will. But the most important thing...
But you're not committing to it, maybe they could isolate for 2 weeks beforehand. It's still a possibility they may have to stay at university for Christmas.
We're in a situation, Fiona, where in Glasgow, hundreds of students have tested positive for coronavirus. These are, young people who are coming in and using shops in the West End of Glasgow, potentially mixing around with other people. The most important thing at this stage for us is to try and contain this virus, and that's why, in a short-term basis, we've put those lockdown procedures in place.
I get that, but staying at Christmas, staying at university at Christmas is still on the table, potentially.
We are very, very hopeful that people can get home at Christmas. Christmas is a long way off at the moment. The most important thing here is controlling this virus, and any politician worth their salt will have that as the #1 priority at the moment.
Let's take another question from Jonathan Donald.
Hi. Have the localised lockdowns and restrictions been totally ineffective in controlling the spread of the virus? And has the inability of the UK government to communicate their messages effectively contributed to some extent to non-compliance amongst certain individuals within our society?
Well, Jonathan's directed his question initially to the UK government, so Grant, I'm going to ask you. There's also some talk now, as I understand it, about simplifying the message with a traffic light system. Is that true?
Yeah, well, first of all, no, I don't think it's been ineffective, to answer your question directly. I look at examples like Luton, for example, or Leicester, where the numbers were very high, local lockdowns, which aren't the full lockdowns that we all knew at the beginning of this, were put in place, and we saw the numbers come down and actually come down to now what are levels which mean they can come out of that process. So I think it's helped a lot. It may also be the case, and the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, has been saying this, that by having lockdowns in specific areas, as we did in Luton and Leicester and now in the northwest and parts of the northeast, we're preventing the spread and preventing the whole country from being able to go into having to go into full lockdown, and then able to unlock those areas. So that's the hope. Simplification you'll have to wait for, and I understand the point, but actually, wherever you are in the country, if you hear that your area is in a lockdown area, it's actually very quick and very easy. And we actually just demonstrated it before coming on the programme, to go to gov.uk, and you can simply look up where you live and see exactly what the rules are. So they are easy to follow. You can look them up. But I think it's very important.
It can't be that easy to follow if the Prime Minister got them wrong.
Well, look, everyone misspeaks. I mean, if you
sure, but I'm not trying to make a cheap. I'm not trying to make a cheap point. I'm simply saying it can't be that easy to understand if even a man in charge.
I mean, he was talking about the rule of 6, because that is generally the rule throughout the country. But it is true in an area that has a local lockdown, additional rules will apply, which generally mean you can't mix with other people in your own home, in your garden, in restaurants and pubs. But you should check the rules on gov.uk locally. But to answer the question, yes, we do believe that from an epidemiological point of view, it is doing something and therefore worth pursuing. And it has stopped us thus far from having to go into a second full lockdown, which surely is in everybody's interest.
And David, in terms of communicating messages effectively and non-compliance amongst some individuals, what's this issue with an SNP?
Well, it's an MP that's no longer the SNP whip, and for a very good reason. And I've got to say, I'm pretty furious for the behaviour of Margaret Ferrier, who...
Do you want to just explain to viewers who might not be familiar with what she's done?
Unfortunately, yes. One of my former colleagues had tested positive for coronavirus and used a train over the course of this week, and quite rightly, she has lost the whip.
So just to be clear, she suspected she had symptoms and took a test. While she was waiting for the results, she went down to Westminster to debate coronavirus regulations, having broken them herself. And then when she did test positive, she went on the train back to Scotland.
Yes, and it's utterly inexcusable, and it's right that she's lost the whip for that, because...
And do you think she should resign? I mean, she herself called for Dominic Cummings to resign, She's lost the whip. Do you think she should resign?
I certainly think her position is untenable, to be honest, because
So you think she should resign?
We're asking people to follow very, very strict public health guidance, and if a Member of Parliament can't do that, I think they've got to reflect upon their position.
So let me hear it from you then. You think her position is untenable? Should she resign?
I find it very difficult to say to my constituents who live in the neighbouring constituency to Rutherglen and Hamilton West that her actions were excusable, and so I think she does have to reflect on her position.
You think she should resign?
I don't think her position is tenable and she should resign.
Now, Gordon, you're nodding your head along to that.
Yeah, I think if she definitely called for Dominic's resignation, and I do think he should have resigned, then I do think her job is untenable. We can't expect the population of the country to follow the guidelines, even if they're not quite sure what they are, when the people in charge who make policy, who appear on the media, simply defy belief. And even though she knew she had the virus and she had a positive test, she actually got on a train. Can't believe it. Inexcusable. Stupid.
Gary?
Yeah, just on a lighter note, I'm starting to wonder, with all the confusion around COVID rules and regulations, whether we need a Friday night quiz to replace Have I Got News for You, hosted by Boris Johnson.
Well, of course, he used to host Have I Got News for You quite some time ago now.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Stuart, Jonathan's question is about, have localised lockdowns and restrictions been ineffective in controlling the spread of the virus? And has the inability of the government, in his view, the UK government, to communicate the message effectively contributed to non-compliance? Now, what's interesting is that when you look at polls, the most recent poll looking at confidence, clarity from the UK government about the clarity of their message, confidence in that is very low. When it comes to the Scottish Government, confidence about that particular thing in terms of clarity of communications is generally pretty high. But nonetheless, on both sides of the border, we're seeing lockdowns and infections rising. So I'm wondering, does it make any difference?
Well, my personal view is it doesn't, if you're asking me the question. I mean, what I find quite comical is that, listen, this is a very serious illness that they're facing, but it isn't, the end of life on Earth. We're going to have to live with it, as the Chancellor has said, as Grant has just said. The second thing is that it is incomprehensible that in a country with 50 or 60 million people, we've actually got 4 different rules. So I can go in a pub in London tonight and I have to leave by 10 o'clock. But I can go to Belfast and I can stay till 10:30. I can be with some friends in London 6, but I can't do that in Scotland. Why can't we have uniform rules across the UK, which would make it much simpler for everybody? But the real issue for me is the one I tried to raise before, and is I'm not remotely poking a stick at our audience here, but I'm quite interested that we're sitting here talking about lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Charlotte's question about mental health. Nobody's talking about the UK PLC's health.
We did last week. We may not be talking about it right now this minute, Stuart, and I'm sorry you weren't there. Maybe you weren't watching, but we absolutely did talk about that.
All our futures and livelihoods depend on us getting back to some sort of normality and living with this crisis, and that's the real issue.
But the health of the workforce is an important input to that. I mean, I just disagree with what you said before about it. There's lives versus livelihoods. That's not right. It's not one thing versus the other, because if you haven't got a healthy workforce, then the economy will not be successful. So actually, being able to isolate the virus is the most important thing, not just for people's health, absolutely crucial though that is. That's absolutely vital for our economy.
But as we know, pointed out by one of our participants this evening, we can't actually put the right. All you do is, the gentleman said, kick the can down the street. You can suppress it here, it pops up there. It's like a balloon.
And you can help businesses be more and more COVID safe. That's what lots of businesses have been doing.
Alison, you're quite right. Give us testing at the door of every business once a week. Give us a test and trace system that works so people can have security. Give us the security. Grant Shapps is the Minister of Transport.
Are you listening, Grant? Are you listening?
I'm going to come back when I
know. We can get on the tube and it's safe. I've been in the tube on London every single day this week. Nobody's using it. And yet it's got to be fine. Buses aren't being used. The road system is completely clogged up because we've told people wherever possible, don't share a car, go on your own so you can't travel anywhere because the roads are all jammed up.
Okay.
It's nonsense that we have to be able to find a way through this problem, but I understand why.
Sure, that's exactly what we're doing with these local lockdowns, which you're also against, which is curious, because if you look at the rate across the country, it's, I don't know, 13 cases per 100,000 in the southwest, but it's over 100 in other places. It's a nonsense to say if you want to apply the same rules everywhere, we'll end up in a position where none of us can do anything. What we're trying to do, and I think arguably successfully now, is get the economy moving, which it is, but still protect people's lives as well. And it is lives and livelihood.
The economy is not moving.
And we have to carry on doing that until the cavalry of, a scientific solution to this, a vaccine or whatever, comes over the horizon. Until then, we have to do what actually works. And we know these local lockdowns, to return to the question, actually do bring the rates down.
Well,
now, Stuart, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you want to talk about UK PLC. We talked about it at some length last week, and there's lots of people in our audience. I know. No, because I know they want to talk about it tonight, so let's hear from some of them. Victoria, you've got your hand up. I'm going to come to you in a second. Let's hear from James Hill, and after that, John Miller.
The whole mixed messages thing. I mean, when you've got scientific advisors that are coming out with comments like hospital admissions are steady, but on a rapid incline. Well, which one is it? Is it steady or is it rapid? And these people are advising the government. And then we get mixed messages from the government at the moment that are saying what we should and shouldn't do. I had full faith in the scientific side of things up until the beginning of this week, when they came out and started using all this terminology and coming out with comments like that. The public just don't know either to go left or right with a lot of these restrictions and rules. Now,
James, you've got a restaurant, haven't you? And just explain. You have 2 restaurants. Forgive me, so you not 1 but 2. Now, how is the pandemic affecting you at the moment? Obviously, I assume business is down, but in terms of bookings for the future, Christmas, say.
We just don't know what to do for December. We don't know if we should keep our staff on. We've got normally this time of year, I have 2/3 of my Christmas bookings in. I have large companies that use one of my restaurants. They have their Christmas parties there. I have no Christmas bookings at all right now. And it's a worrying, daunting experience going into this period for our trade. And I just don't understand how the new job support scheme is meant to help our trades at the moment. We have no guidance on the next 3 months at all of what our trade should do, what we should advise our customers. Do we get Christmas party menus out? Do we not get Christmas party menus out? And there is just no guidance whatsoever for our trades at the moment. I'm not saying the government haven't done wonders so far with the economy, with the packages we've had, the furlough scheme for staff, the grants we've had. Brilliant. I can't deny that. But moving forward now, we've got 6 months ahead of us where we're going to lose so much of the hospitality trade because of uncertainty.
John.
Well, I agree with James. I have a hotel as well as a restaurant. And in the hotel, we cater for weddings and wedding guests. And now, just last week, we were allowed 30 at a wedding guest. And overnight, and it's so funny, I listened to Grant there, and he says everything should be taken locally and individually, yeah? And all of a sudden, he put a blanket and said, no, weddings are only 15. I can do the same in my restaurant that can take 120 people, COVID safe, with 2 meters apart. Yet he will not look at anything at all that is ideal for individual restaurants and things at all. They just put a blanket ban. And I don't know if you also know with them as well. I was actually out on the Saturday night when I kicked everybody out at 10 o'clock and they had a street party.
They had a street party outside?
Yeah, they had the street party. They all gathered outside, and then they had the street party to take the beer home and went to somewhere that, like a party outside or to people's houses. Yet they'd been already in a COVID-safe environment, and this is what the 10 o'clock rule does.
Victoria.
We're a tourism business. We've already lost our Christmas.
So what is your business, Victoria?
We're a tea room, gift shop, visitor information centre for Havering Wall. We rely heavily on visitors. We've obviously had no visitors. Our version of Christmas is from April through to, well, obviously, basically, June, July, August. We've already lost our business. our profit for the entire year, and we've had to temporarily close until March next year. I really don't think that anybody understands what it's like to lose your business and the impact. And I don't really think that any of the politicians get it. They've never run anything. They don't understand it. They're all being paid. They're sitting, receiving their pay every month, but they don't know what it's like to be in a stressful environment. And, I'm not alone. There's 3 million people that haven't had any support. We've had a little bit of support, but we seem to be left now high and dry. What do you do when you don't have any revenue coming in? How do you pay? How do you sustain your business? And yet we're just classed by the government as not viable. But we are viable. We had a successful business for 10 years, and only through COVID have we had no visitors and therefore, no revenue. And we're just cast aside. And as James was saying, he's going to lose Christmas. What is anybody going to do about that? Does anybody really care? Are we expendable? We are the backbone of the country, small businesses, and we are described as being the backbone of the country. But we're just going to be left now high and dry.
All right.
I've had to close, my staff, I've had to make redundant. This is devastating to me personally. And yet everybody's just sitting here thinking about, what? They'll just move on. But how can we move on? What can we do?
Yeah. Victoria,
what is anybody going to do to help us?
Well, let's put that in a minute. I should point out, Victoria, obviously, a number of politicians have and do run businesses. I know Grant has been one of them. Helen, I know I've got to come to you, and I just wanted to hear from Chris. You had your hand up.
Just answering the original question, really, we seem to have moved on from it a bit. If people did what they were being asked to do, it would solve the problem. End of. We wouldn't have increasing numbers of people going down with the disease. People are not isolating. They're not social distancing, as was evidenced when John let them out of his bar that night. And so, take responsibility, follow the rules, and let's at least give them a chance to work.
Helen, you've been trying to get into the conversation.
Well, I'd certainly like to echo that last point. I mean, the science here is actually quite straightforward. Now that we understand coronavirus, it is behaving very predictably. Viruses do what viruses do, which is replicate and spread from person to person. And the best metaphor I can think of is think of a bottle of pop that's pressurized, it's been shaken. You start to unscrew the top, it comes out. You have to put the top back on. And if you're going to live with this pressurized system, you have to release a little bit of a time if you're going to deal with it. Then you can deal with it as it bubbles out. And that's where local lockdowns and following the hands, face, distance and space, test, trace and isolate have to come in. But you can't miss out any of those steps. Every single one of us has a responsibility here and now. And it is absolutely right that we need our economy working. We need people working. Work is good for health, and health is good for work. These things go hand in hand, and so we can't think of them in isolation. So we need clarity of messaging, consistency of messaging, and I get intensely frustrated that Hadrian's Wall and Arthur's Dyke are seen as some sort of barrier to viruses. They're not. We need the same messages across the country. The science isn't different. We should, however, recognise high areas of infection and low areas of infection do require differences, but we don't require differences in 4 nations. Please, can we get that clarity done? And let's get together as a nation now. This is a serious illness. It kills, and it leaves a huge proportion of people ill for a long, long time. And when they're ill, they're not working and contributing to society either. So covered a few things there, Fiona.
And Helen, when you hear John talking about the fact, and we've seen, we've all seen stuff online about people getting together and having a party after 10 o'clock, what does that make you feel as a GP and, of course, someone representing healthcare professionals?
It's so frustrating, Fiona. I mean, it's sad, it's frustrating, because I know that people fundamentally want to do the right thing. But this pressurised system is a problem. There is pressure and people want to release. But the release of everyone ending out on the street at the same time is not helping. So I'm sad, I'm frustrated, and I just want to reiterate the messages because the science is really simple. This virus isn't getting less virulent, it's not getting milder, it's just as deadly as it was at day one. We are testing more, so we're finding more of the milder cases. Please, please follow the rules, look after one another, and we will get through this. But it's not going to be over quickly. We've got a long haul ahead of us.
We've got a few minutes left and I want to get one more question in from Gordon McGregor.
Do you think the government should help football clubs financially when the players are still receiving massive salaries compared to an average person's wage?
Right. Well, Alison, I was going to come to you because you Carlisle United FC, which plays in League Two, is warning it faces a 1.2 million shortfall. And I'm thinking about, obviously, you've got Merseyside now that's going into, or the Liverpool area as well that's going into restrictions. It's going to affect the clubs there too.
Yeah, football clubs are in a really bad situation, and we heard the point just now about players' wages, which is one side of it that we've needed to regulate better and have a better system of governance in our national game for many years, and the virus has shown this in sharp relief.
So, do you think the Premier League should dip into their pocket?
I think the Premier League have got to contribute, but I think it's bigger than that. The government promised in their 2019 manifesto a fan-led review of football governance, and the Minister says he wants to include finances as well. Labour agree with this, and I've been banging on about football finances and governance since I was first elected as a Member of Parliament in 2010. That's a lot of talk about football in 10 years. And
so what would Labour do now?
We have written to the government offering our principles for reviewing the regulations to make it better. Right now, if I was the Minister for Sport now, I would be getting the Premier League, the EFL, and all the parties round the table and saying, can we all stick to the principle that no football supporter in this country should lose a much-loved sports club just because of the virus? Now, we know that the finances of football have been, shall I say, challenging for a long time anyway. So we've got to separate out the changes that we need for the medium-term and the long-term viability of the game with a way of protecting clubs in the short term if it's just the virus that will tip them over. Because I've seen, whether it's what happened with Macclesfield recently or what happened with Bury, I've seen how it impacts people's as supporters when clubs go under. It's part of your identity. It's who you are, and football supporters deserve much better than they're getting at the moment.
David?
Look, I support a League One club in Scotland, which is not players on massive salaries, and I think one of the things that's really important for people to remember is that, yes, there are big football clubs out there, players that are on big wages, but for the vast majority of us in communities, it's small clubs, small teams who are really struggling at the moment. But one of the points I was making in the House of Commons this week to the government as well is about being mindful of the fact, my own constituency at Celtic Football Club, the biggest football club in Scotland, but it's about making sure that people remember that there's also a local economic aspect to this as well. I've got a 60,000 seat football stadium.
So what do you think should happen? What would you do to help the clubs lower down who are losing out because they aren't getting people in?
Well, we certainly need to go back and look again at the financial support that's offered to them, and the financial package that was brought forward by the Treasury, whether it's in furlough, whether it's the excluded 3 million, is just totally inadequate. The government has pulled a lot of that financial support, so I don't think that Rishi Sunak can get to Christmas without having to look again at the financial packages he's offered, because what he's put on the table so far is just not going to cut it for communities, for clubs, and most importantly for people who are really struggling at the moment.
Stuart, you a footy fan?
I am a football fan. I'm a Spurs fan for my pains. At the end of the day, the Premiership's got to help the smaller teams on the EFL, and they've got to do something. And there is a deal in place, as you know. The argument at the moment is about the access of foreign players coming in. So there's a three-way trade-off going on. If they let more foreign players come in, they'll give the money to the EFL. The EFL are saying, well, don't do that because you won't bring our youngsters through. So they've got to sort it out. But the industry needs to help itself, because fundamentally, as that gentleman said at the beginning, the people at the top end have got a disproportionate amount of the income and the revenues.
Jem, you've got your hand up.
It's just it's more of a statement than anything. Our local team, Carlisle United, they've really suffered recently, but what they've done is they have kept most of the money that people have paid for their season tickets, and they're allowing their fans to watch it online, so they're maintaining, some of the income and some of the revenue, and giving something back to the fans, which I think is really good. I think it's a really positive step.
And Helen, I can see you nodding away.
Yeah, this is a much wider issue than football clubs. And I have to say, I agree with the point that football should support football. The richer clubs should support the poorer clubs through this really difficult time. But we need to think about cricket clubs and rugby clubs and athletic grounds and all the other sporting facilities that are really suffering right now. And this, so yeah, football's great, but there are other sports out there too. So let's think about them all, please.
And Grant, the government has promised an emergency grant to the National League, so the 5th tier of English football. What about the rest of it? Is this something the government is eventually going to pitch in the way that Dave is suggesting, or are you going to leave it to the Premier League?
Well, look, I do think I think the Premier League does have much to give, as it were, in this. It's to their advantage that these players come up from the other teams, and if Carlisle are playing, I think Barrow on Saturday, and
Well, you've been swatting off, haven't you, Grant? Currying favour with our audience here.
But they will need to be able to carry on playing, as has been said. They've come up with their own innovative ways to do that, and we're looking at a bunch of things as well, like how you can use technology in football to help the clubs and help audiences and so on and so forth. But it is something that's been very hard at work with, and I do think that the Premier League is a significant part of the solution, as well as government and therefore taxpayer.
And Gordon, this was your question. What's your view?
I think that the football club should be, in a way, if you can demonstrate you can, by social distancing, you can stop the spread of the virus. The stadiums have all seated numbers, and I do think should be allowed a certain amount of supporters to watch the game, and that would alleviate some of the pressure, both for the fans as well as the clubs. But the governing bodies should get together. I don't think the government should be involved at all, but I also think the players have a responsibility as well. Some of these players, I mean, OK, in the lower leagues they're not earning as much, but when we were furloughed and people were living off 80% for the wages, I dare say some footballers could live off 10% of their wage. Yeah, and I'm talking about obviously the real high earners here. So I do think it needs to be, all the governing bodies need to get together, sort it out. I don't think the government should be involved, because it's not just sport, it's not just football. I mean, there's other sports as well. And where they can, they should help the lower clubs. That's my opinion.
God, well, Grant, it's a rare thing where we have where people tell you that the government shouldn't be involved, I think, at the moment.
Absolutely.
So there you are. So you can enjoy that moment while it lasts.
That point about letting the spectators in the stadium, that was something we were hoping to move towards on a test basis. But we have this, absolute desire to have schools and work back, and we can't, if the R rate is above 1, do other discretionary things. When we get it down, we can do these other things, which will help the football clubs and all other sport.
OK, I'm afraid our hour is up. I see some of you got your hands up. I'm really sorry we've run out of time. Of course, our questions tonight, you all came from Carlisle. Next week, we'll have a virtual audience from Coventry, and we're going to be joined there by the former Finance Minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, the next Tory MP who began his political career in Margaret Thatcher's government, Michael Portillo. The week after that, we will be in Edinburgh with Scottish Government Finance Secretary Kate Forbes and the new leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross. So if you live in or around Coventry or Edinburgh, get in touch. It'll be your opportunity to put your questions and get involved in the debate. And you can apply by going to the Question Time website and follow the instructions there. Adrian, Charles and guests are on 5 Live Extra Time, as always. It's your chance to have your say on the issues. Continue this conversation. You can see here how you can get in touch. But for now, thank you very much to the panel for coming tonight. Helen, for joining us down the line and getting your 10 penneth in. And, of course, thank you to our audience, our virtual audience, Carlisle. Very good of you to join us. And thank you for joining us as well. Thank you to you at home. Until next time from Question Time. Bye-bye.